How's it going, everyone? My name is Jakejames Lugo, and welcome to the channel, where you'll find some of the most fair and honest game reviews out here.
Hello there.
And we're back again talking about Star Wars games as part of my ultimate Star Wars games tier list, literally ranking every single Star Wars game to ever come out, to ever be released on every single platform. I've already done a couple videos previously that's part of a playlist. If you haven't checked those out, definitely go check them out whenever you get a chance, hopefully after this video, because we talked about every single Star Wars PlayStation game on every PlayStation platform. We talked about every Star Wars Xbox game on every Xbox home console release. All of them, literally every single one. We even did all the Nintendo handheld consoles, all the Game Boy consoles and everything else that's Nintendo handhelds. All those games, all those Star Wars games ranked on an ultimate tier list for everybody that's curious about Star Wars games. This is the resources, this is the type of stuff that you definitely want to see. And for this one right here, after talking about all those other games and all those other platforms, we're finally going to tackle Nintendo home console releases. These are Star Wars games that came out on the NES, on the Super Nintendo, on the GameCube, the N64, the Wii and the Wii U, the Nintendo Switch, all that jazz.
This is where the fun begins.
Literally every single Star Wars game for a Nintendo console at home. So I hope you guys enjoy this. Let me know some of your thoughts about everything in the comment section down below. Tell me some of your favorite games that I'm pretty sure we're going to talk about. We're going to tackle every single one of them. Also, don't forget to check out some of the previous videos like I mentioned in the playlist. This will get added to that. So if you're already watching this on the playlist, it'll be followed by some of the other videos if you haven't already watched them. So let's get started, man, because there is so much to get into. Now, a couple ground rules, like what we usually do with these videos. It's going to be every single Nintendo console that's at home, all the home console releases, but also specifically Star Wars games that are considered true Star Wars games. This means no Angry Birds Star Wars, no Star Wars Pinball, no Star Wars mobile games or anything of that nature. Specifically true Star Wars games that we all know. The only exceptions to this are games like Lego Star Wars, which are more like Star Wars games, even though it's a collaboration between Lego and Lucasfilm, or LucasArts, I should say. So, yeah, let's get started. So, the first console, of course, we have to start with the classics. Like, you can't just start something like this without acknowledging the NES, the Nintendo Entertainment System, the very first Nintendo home console for many people, you know, known as the Famicom in Japan. So the very first one that we have to start with is Star Wars on the NES. Like, literally the very first game for the very first Star Wars movie. And this one is interesting because for a lot of people, some people really like it, some people really hate it. Now, where does it fit on the tier list? Because it's an action platformer. If you've never played it before, it has a little bit of mixed gameplay in a couple different ways. A little bit different than the Japanese release that we had on the Famicom, because that game is much more harder, but it's still made in the same type of spirit, or at least this one is made in the same type of spirit as that one. And for me personally, I have to say that this game is a C-tier Star Wars game.
What?
The main reason being is because, like how it is with most NES games, with a few exceptions, these games are difficult. There's a lot of little bugs and glitches and little things that happen on the NES, or NES games, I should say, specifically this one, that make it a little bit tougher, a little bit more annoying to deal with. And for some people, they might not enjoy that. Other people will have a lot of nostalgia for it, especially if you grew up around the mid to late 80s and you were playing games like this. Even if you weren't playing games on the Atari 2600, I'm pretty sure you were like seeing a lot of different video games that were related to Star Wars, including something like this. So Star Wars on the NES gets the C tier. The next one, which is the only other Star Wars game on the NES, is The Empire Strikes Back. Now, The Empire Strikes Back is built different, okay? It's built very different in comparison to the first Star Wars movie, which is simply titled Star Wars, but we all know it's based on Episode 4, A New Hope. This one is on Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. And if I had to really say, like, where this one could land, I would also put this in C tier. Now, the only reason why both these games get put into C tier is because they're not bad games. If anything, The Empire Strikes Back is built a little different in a more positive way, where you have a lot more actions, you have a lot more movement options, there's a lot more levels compared to the original Star Wars game on NES. It's based on all the different scenes from The Empire Strikes Back, from the stuff going on Hoth, to the stuff going on Dagobah for Luke Skywalker when he goes to Bespin and Cloud City. All that stuff. Everything that you could think of from the movie is accounted for in here, with a few exceptions, of course. But it doesn't make it any more that much more better on the tier list compared to other Star Wars games that we're eventually going to talk about. But The Empire Strikes Back is not a bad game. It's just, again, much like the first game, it's a product of its time. It's limited by the hardware of the NES, which I feel like is, again, it's a great console, again, classic, iconic console, but a lot of games really suffered because of those limitations technically, where they weren't able to do certain things, and then certain quality of life stuff that we got later on with other Nintendo games and other Star Wars games on Nintendo platforms that aren't really here in these types of games. That being said, okay, those are the only two NES Star Wars games, because we're not doing the Japanese release of Star Wars. Again, that's a Japanese release. We're strictly sticking to North American releases here and true Star Wars games. So no other like spin-offs or anything like that. But those are the only two real Star Wars games that are on the NES. There was no Return of the Jedi game, which is a shame. If you do remember, if you watched my Game Boy Ultimate tier list of Star Wars games, we talked about some of the games on there that are based on these two, which are both Star Wars and The Empire Strikes Back, which are kind of like not true ports, but very much close to as you could get for a part of these two games, but on the Game Boy. So that's that. Those are the two Star Wars games for NES. Let's move on to the Super Nintendo. We all know what comes up next.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Super Star Wars. Okay, Super Star Wars, part of the trilogy of Super Star Wars games on the Super Nintendo. Iconic games, beloved by so many people for one reason or another. Now, great visuals, great soundtrack using all the different parts of the Super Nintendo. Sounds so much better than what we got on the NES, and arguably much better than what we've seen, or heard, I should say, on the Sega Genesis at the time. Now, where does Super Star Wars, the first game, based on A New Hope, rank on the tier list? Because these games are arguably much harder than the games that are on the NES. Like, they are much more ridiculously difficult compared to those first two games that we got, and arguably more difficult than any other Star Wars game to come beforehand.
I got a bad feeling about this.
I would say that this game right here, Super Star Wars, the first game, is also going to go in C tier.
What?
Now, the only reason why I'm putting this in C tier is because of two main reasons, which we'll get into a little bit more when we get to Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi. This was the first in this trilogy. It really established the idea of like the movement, a lot of the different power-ups you could get, the type of like, mechanics that we have involved when fighting boss fights, which the boss fights in these games are insane. Like, they're over-the-top ridiculous and they're hard as hell. But the big problem is that unlike some of the later games, which still suffer from similar issues, this one, the first game, has a lot of difficulty problems where the spikes are just astronomical between how you get hit, how much damage you take, how much damage you deal to your opponents and to the bosses. It gets absolutely nuts. You have to really be on your P's and Q's in order to beat a game like this. It is that challenging, sometimes borderline unfair in most cases. I put it in C tier because, again, not a bad game, but not a great game. A lot of people love this because of the nostalgia, but it's still very much a classic in its own right. Which leads us to The Empire Strikes Back. Now, The Empire Strikes Back, if I have to be real with all of you, I put this in the B tier. The reason why I put Empire Strikes Back above its predecessor is because there's more stages, original stages that are based on the Empire Strikes Back movie. The visuals, I think, are top-notch, a little bit better, in my opinion, than the first Super Star Wars, even though most of them are like pretty much the same. But the fact that we get a different color palette with Hoth, with Bespin, with all the different areas that we have and all the different variety in gameplay, there's a lot of differences in comparison to what we got from the first Super Star Wars. Now, you can play as multiple characters like you could in the first game. Again, in the first game, you get to play as Han, Luke, Chewie, and I believe, you don't get to play as Leia in that one, but I do think you don't get to play as Leia in The Empire Strikes Back either, but you get to play as Han, Luke, Chewie, etc. It's Luke and Chewie mostly, but I think also you get to play as Han. I'm not sure. Again, I got to go back and play it again, but there's multiple characters, and the visuals and everything else about it, just a little bit better, puts it over its predecessor.
Impressive. Most impressive.
And then finally we go to the Return of the Jedi. Okay, Return of the Jedi is also B tier, and I would argue this one technically should go into A tier. As a matter of fact, you know what? Empire Strikes Back is going to go into A tier. To me, okay, my personal opinion, Return of the Jedi, Super Return of the Jedi is better than The Empire Strikes Back because we get to play as all the main heroes for the most part. I think with maybe the exception of Lando. We get Luke, we get Han, we get Chewie, we get Leia. Again, all that entire, opening sequence or the beginning section of the movie playable in this game, where you get to play as multiple characters. You get to choose who you want to play as. Very, very cool. And yeah, it's the culmination of the entire trilogy. You got awesome boss battles against a lot of different characters, or a lot of different, aliens and different stuff that you run into. Obviously, since it's the end of the trilogy, there's a little bit of an edge to it, but I feel like you take everything good about the Super Star Wars games, you put it into that one final big blowout game, and all the little tweaks and stuff. Now, don't get me wrong, this game is still hard as hell. It's still difficult. It still has a couple problems here and there, like the other two games do. But it's still, in my personal opinion, the best of the three. So it gets a little bit better with each game on the Super Nintendo, which is nice, which is really, really cool. That being said, however, this is pretty much the end of all the Star Wars games on the Super Nintendo, which is a darn shame, because I wish there was more. Like, I wish that, because this is like 1994, 95, maybe 96, or actually no, maybe at the cutoff point of like 1995, I want to say. Because this is when we start getting closer to that prequel trilogy era, where it's like 97, 98 is when we start to hit the prequels. But also, right around this time, after the Super Star Wars games, we start getting into a lot of the intermediate stuff leading into the prequels, which is like all the extended universe stuff. But now we go into the Nintendo 64. Like, we're done with Super Nintendo, but now it's time for the N64, which this is going to be cool, okay? This is going to be cool for me because I love this. And we're going to start with the first game that I ever played on the N64, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Shadows of the Empire, okay, this game is awesome. Now, the reason why it's awesome for Star Wars fans is because it's an original story that takes place during the original trilogy. It follows an original character that we've never met before during this era. It has a variety of gameplay that does some pretty good stuff. Arguably the best 3D section of the Battle of Hoth up to that point, you know, in history. And as well as also, we get to see our characters lead into stuff that we already know with Return of the Jedi, because this takes place right at the start of The Empire Strikes Back, and then spins off into a separate thing that leads into the Return of the Jedi, right up to the point where Luke and Leia decide to go to Jabba's palace to go rescue Han Solo, because there's a whole bunch of stuff. We get to fight Boba Fett, we get to actually fight IG-88. We discover this new, like, threat that's besides the Empire, and besides Darth Vader, we got Prince Shizor, who's another character that's really interesting. A lot of cool stuff happens here. We get introduced to swoop bikes. Swoop bikes are a thing in this. This is pretty dope, okay?
Impressive. Most impressive.
So overall, where does this rank on the tier list, however, okay? In comparison to all the Star Wars games on Nintendo platforms. If I have to choose, and if I'm being honest, as much as it pains me to do this,
I have a bad feeling about this. I've got a bad feeling about this.
I have a bad feeling about this.
Oh, I have a bad feeling about this.
this game goes into B tier. Star Wars Shadows of the Empire is a B tier Star Wars game in the whole ultimate tier list of Star Wars games. And the main reason being is because not only can the controls be a little stiff on the Nintendo 64, honestly, okay, there is a lot of variety for this game, but also there isn't a lot of great things that it does overall. I mean, it does the Battle of Hoth phenomenally. Okay, it's awesome. It has those like on-rail section where you're controlling the Outrider, which is Dash Rendar's ship, which is very similar to the Millennium Falcon. You have those on-rail sections which are in space, and then you have that final battle against the Skyhook, which you get to control the actual Outrider and move it around. However, it's not in the same way as like what we would get with the next game we're going to talk about. But unfortunately, it doesn't do much more great beyond that. It's a third-person action game. It's a little bit stiff with some of the controls. If this game was remade and remastered for modern day, I feel like a lot of things would get tweaked to make it so much better. Okay? I have to say, as much as I love Shadows of the Empire, it is still just a B-level tier Star Wars game. And I think it's good there, to be honest with you. It's not bad, but it's good. It's not great, but it's definitely good.
I don't believe that. And you're sounding like a separatist.
So, the next one we get to talk about, one of my favorites, Star Wars Rogue Squadron. This game right here, son, okay, shot some adrenaline into an entire genre of arcade flight action games, okay? This is an S-tier Star Wars game. I'm just putting it out there, okay? I'm telling everybody, Star Wars Rogue Squadron is an S-tier Star Wars game. And the main reason why it's an S tier Star Wars game is because it's fun as heck to play even now, has a bunch of ships for you to control that are part of the Rebel Alliance, allowing you to get into missions that take place after Star Wars Episode 4 A New Hope, but also allows you to play a lot of historic battles in it. You get to unlock the Death Star Trench Run, you get to unlock the Battle of Hoth, and you get to even unlock a bonus mission that has Luke racing his buddies from Rogue Squadron in his T-16 Skyhopper. I mean, that's like legend stuff or like extended material from the original trilogy from A New Hope that we never really got to see, or at least rendered in like a realistic, awesome way, or as realistic as it can be.
Impressive. Most impressive.
So the fact that Rogue Squadron, the first game, has all that stuff in it, and then some. By the way, you get to control the Millennium Falcon, you get to control a TIE Interceptor, you get to control via a code, because this came out, I want to say around 1998, I think, or 97, or just before around 97. This game had a code to allow you to unlock a Naboo starfighter to actually use in this throughout all these missions. This was before Battle of Naboo came out, which is what the next game we're going to talk about. But this game is awesome. It's an S-tier Star Wars game, pretty darn good, so much fun to play. And again, if you haven't played Rogue Squadron yet, I highly recommend that you do so. Do what you got to do to play it, because it is that good.
Nice work, Rogue Squadron. We might make a name for ourselves after all.
But moving on from there, on the N64, look at this tier list so far. Pretty darn good right here, I have to say. Much better than the Nintendo handheld list, I'll tell you right now, right off the bat. But let's talk about Star Wars Battle for Naboo, okay? So Star Wars Battle for Naboo, technically, quote-unquote, is the true sequel to Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Now, this game is pretty much almost exactly the same as Star Wars Rogue Squadron. The only difference is that this takes place during the prequel era, so shortly after Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. So this involves Naboo and the Naboo starfighters, as well as a whole bunch of other extra stuff that you have that takes place within that time frame. So this is before the Clone Wars, okay? So no Clone Wars stuff, nothing involving Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, none of that stuff. This, to me, if I had to be honest, okay, this goes a little bit further down. So an A-tier Star Wars game, I would say, simply because of the controls, simply because it feels good to play and stuff. But you know what? If I'm going to be honest, I'm going to knock it down to B-tier, okay? I'm going to put it right there. I feel that B-tier is the better spot for Star Wars Battle of Naboo.
What?
The main reason being is because there's less iconic stuff that's involved with this actual, this actual game, in comparison to Rogue Squadron, the very first Rogue Squadron game. With the first Rogue Squadron game, like I said, you can unlock some of the iconic battles from the movies that we all know and stuff. With this one, you get unlockable stuff, which is cool. You even get a couple joke unlockables, which are really neat, that were also part of the first game. But with this one, what holds it back, I feel like, is there's not a lot of love and like, you know, care put into this game in comparison to the first game. Like with the first game, even the menus like were really like handled with care and like with tender love and care, I should say. That's the best way to put it. With this one, it's a little bit more basic. It feels like this one was put out a little bit faster, but it still controls good. Like the flight controls are still good. The combat itself, you know, very similar to the first game. So if you felt that the first game was tough, this is pretty much more of the same. But I feel like because it's limited with the time frame and limited with the type of like stuff that you get involved with, I feel like it holds it back a little bit more. So originally I was going to put it in A tier, but I think B tier is a little bit more acceptable because not a lot of people have played it, to be honest with you. And I don't feel like a lot of people really remember it as much when they did play it in comparison to Rogue Squadron and the Rogue Squadron series, I should say.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
B tier for Star Wars Battle of Naboo, okay? Now, the final N64 Star Wars game, Star Wars Episode 1 Racer.
Now this is pod racing.
Now I am going to be totally honest with all of you. I know people love this game. I know people look at this as a classic. And I know there is some level of like, you know, appreciation for pod racing games. We all know this, okay? That being said, however, okay, this is a C-tier Star Wars game. And the reason why I say it's a C-tier Star Wars game in comparison to all the other Star Wars games out there like that, and it's very similar to what I said with Star Wars Racer's Revenge. I mean, it's fun, it's interesting. However, this game is really bare bones. I know it's gotten re-released on the Nintendo Switch, and I know I've seen some re-releases even on the PlayStation Network, and some people have played it, they say they really like it, but that's only because there's no other real, like, you know, Star Wars racing games. There's no real, like, Star Wars pod racing games, I should say, because we have Super Bombad Racing, which is like Mario Kart, but true pod racing games, we got a lot. We didn't really get a lot of them. Like, we only got 2 that are on home consoles, plus the arcade game that everybody remembers. But with this one, it's so bare bones. There isn't a lot, and it's very repetitive. I feel like it could get very tough and difficult dealing with the races because not only is there a lot of rubber banding with the actual opponents. Again, this takes place during the episode 1 time frame, so you have young Anakin Skywalker, you have Sebulba, you have all these other characters that are related, to episode 1. And that's cool. This was all during the hype of the release of episode 1, The Phantom Menace. But as far as a game is concerned, I feel like it needed more guts in there. It needed more unlockables. It needed more stuff to do. It needed more races, possibly. You're mostly racing on like a few planets, like in comparison to like how many planets are out there, with whatever's going on with the Star Wars galaxy. But as good as this might be for some people, in relation to every other Star Wars game to come out, this isn't up there like that. I feel like some people like it. They would probably bump it up to B tier, but for me, I feel like it's fair to put this in the C tier category because there really isn't all that much to do. There really isn't when you really look at it from like a 20,000 foot vantage point. So that being said, okay, now all the N64 Star Wars games are done. Look at this list. We got 1 S tier Star Wars game, we got 1 A tier Star Wars game, a couple B tier, and a couple C tier. Not a bad start. No trash tier games as of yet. Okay, as of yet. Let me just put it out there.
I have a bad feeling about this.
We get to go talk about the GameCube. And this is when things start to really cook up, okay?
This is where the fun begins.
So the first game for the Nintendo GameCube, okay, that I'm going to talk about, Star Wars The Clone Wars, okay? I'm going to put this one in C tier as well. The reason why I'm putting this in C tier, much like I did in the previous Star Wars tier list, okay, I may have put that one a little bit higher, but I still feel like this is C tier for GameCube, for Nintendo GameCube and Nintendo releases, because again, suffers from a lot of issues with the tank controls, a lot of bugs and glitches. As far as like a Clone Wars game, the on-foot sections aren't all that great. They're very difficult and very like stiff to control. There's a bunch of other little issues here and there that I've talked about many times. I even talked about this in my review of the Clone Wars. If you haven't watched it yet, definitely go watch it after this video, and I go into much more detail. But this was the very first like game based on the Clone Wars, like really based on the Clone Wars. I think the one that came after this or around the same time was on the the Game Boy Advance, which was Attack of the Clones and also the New Droid Army, because this is when Episode 2 was already released, or right around the time it was released in theaters, and that was part of all that hype train and stuff. So C tier for Star Wars The Clone Wars. Going in B tier, Lego Star Wars, the video game. Much like I've said in the previous videos about the PlayStation and Xbox Star Wars games, this game is good. It's in B tier, mainly because it's still pretty darn good to play. It's still fun. It's Lego, which is awesome. It's the first 3 Star Wars movies all together spoofed, and it's just a joy to play through. Lego games are just a joy to play through, like real talk. Like they're always fun. There's never anything truly bad about them, to be honest with you, and they're just chill. They're just super, super chill. Now, coming off from that, okay, because I put B tier for Lego Star Wars, the video game, and then we go to A tier for Lego Star Wars 2, the original trilogy. Much like I did in the previous videos as well, where I talked about these games, because again, they've been on multiple platforms. The original trilogy, episode 4, 5, and 6, Lego, what more do you want? Like, it's everything that we know and love about the original trilogy, just in Lego form. And it's really fun. It's cool. It's dope. And I think that everybody loves it. I love it. I'm pretty sure many of you out there loves Legos, especially Lego Star Wars stuff, especially those sets. They're so dope. But yeah, so Lego Star Wars 2, more Lego Star Wars action, but set in the original trilogy. What more can you really say about it? Now, moving on from there on the GameCube, let's go to a classic. Let's go to a real classic, okay? Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast. This game, straight up, okay, automatic A tier. Tell you straight up right now. Now, I know some people would put this in S tier. The only reason why I don't put this in S tier is because I think Jedi Academy is much better. This has the better story, to be honest with you, like real talk. However, Jedi Academy on the Xbox and on PC has the better gameplay because it has more to do and more stuff available to it. On the GameCube, this game is still dope. I remember watching all the commercials and the coverage of Jedi Outcast when it came out originally on both Xbox and on GameCube, because I saw G4, like X-Play and stuff, like covering it. They were doing all these like videos about it, reviewing it. It was really dope because people love the lightsaber combat. I feel like once you get the lightsaber in this game, things get so much better, especially when you have your force powers and stuff. However, okay, before that and leading up to it with all the FPS gameplay, which is very similar to Star Wars Dark Forces and the first Jedi Knight game, it's a little bit of a drag. But it has the better story than Jedi Academy, in my opinion, with Kyle Katarn. It's dope to see his story play out. He's like one of the original extended universe characters that really covered a lot of stuff that we ended up getting new canon for later on, including how the Rebels got the Death Star plans, as well as also what happened after Return of the Jedi. So very, very cool stuff overall. If you're a big fan of Star Wars games and you have not played Jedi Outcast, I highly recommend that you do so. Even if you have to go watch a video on YouTube here to check out the story and stuff, I highly recommend that you do so because it's very interesting. It's very cool. This was a vibe back in the day, especially on the GameCube, because if you didn't have an Xbox, you probably had a GameCube and you probably ended up getting this.
Impressive. Most impressive.
But if you didn't get that game, though, okay, the one you did get for sure is Star Wars Rogue Leader. This is an S-tier Star Wars game. Another Star Wars game from the Rogue Squadron series in S-tier. That's what I'm talking about. Yes, absolutely yes, that's an S-tier Star Wars game. Not only does it have new levels, new places to go to, looks phenomenal, okay, new missions, new unlockables, it's new ships to control. I mean, look at all the ships you could control in Rogue Squadron and Rogue Leader specifically. It's pretty awesome, okay? There's a lot of great stuff about that game. Anybody that owns a GameCube that loves Star Wars definitely had this game, especially because they were more than likely some of the same people that played Rogue Squadron on the Nintendo 64 or any of the other Star Wars games on the N64. This game was awesome, straight up. It's so good. And then, speaking of which, Rebel Strike. Okay. Now, Rebel Strike gets knocked down a few pegs, okay? The reason why it gets knocked down a few pegs, we're going down to A tier with Star Wars Rogue Squadron 3 Rebel Strike for a couple reasons. It stays up high on the list because it looks good. It's got new game modes, new gameplay elements, and new different mechanics introduced into this, including new ships, as well as also co-op of all the missions from Rogue Leader, which is awesome. That is amazing. However,
I have a bad feeling about this.
Okay? However, what knocks this down below Rogue Leader is because those on-foot sections for Rebel Strike are not as good as compared to the rest of the game. It totally brings the momentum for a lot of sections to a screeching halt because you get to play through missions as Luke Skywalker from most of the movies and other missions, on foot, which, is kind of cool in premise or at least on paper, but in execution with this game, it just wasn't as good. It's not as good as controlling your starfighter, your X-Wing, your B-Wing, your Y-Wing, the Falcon, whatever have you. Does not feel as good and is not as fun to play in comparison to all that stuff, right? Now, in comparison to Rogue Leader, like I said, that's the only reason why it's a little bit further down on the tier list. Because if it wasn't for the fact that those on-foot sections were not that great in comparison to the rest of the game, this would be an automatic S-tier Star Wars game, without question. But it stays high up on the list because of the sheer amount of content and the stuff that it tries to do. It's a shame because I would have loved to see this series continue after this into other, Nintendo consoles, because the Rogue Squadron series was awesome. Look at this. You got 3 games, okay, high up on this tier list. 2 S-tier Star Wars games, straight up, 2 of them, 2 S-tier Star Wars games, and 1 A-tier Star Wars game. Not bad. Not bad at all, I have to definitely say. It's kind of like, Knights of the Old Republic. Knights of the Old Republic, I still scored pretty high, even though the second game has all its issues and stuff, but still. As far as a Star Wars series that's highly recommended, definitely play the Rogue Squadron games. They are definitely up there as some of the best of the best. Now, one more GameCube game that we have to talk about is Star Wars Bounty Hunter. Now, Star Wars Bounty Hunter, I've reviewed here on the channel. You should definitely go watch the video review if you can. I talked about it. It's an awesome premise. It's an awesome concept for a Star Wars game. Playing as Jango Fett right before the events of Episode 2 Attack of the Clones, you're going around capturing bounties, like looking for people, getting them dead or alive, collecting credits, stuff. Sounds awesome. I get to use a jetpack? Are you serious? Heck yeah, I'm down for this. Now, here's the problem, though, okay? The problem is that the controls can also be very stiff. There's a lot of bugs and glitches in this game as far as, certain areas that, you either clip through some of the certain sections as well as also the hit detection and how much damage certain enemies can take could be really annoying. Straight up annoying. Anybody that's played this game either on the GameCube or on the PlayStation 2 or even on the PlayStation Network, because there was a PSN re-release of this game that has a couple things tweaked a little bit and also trophy support that also has the same problems. This is, to me, a B-tier level Star Wars game. It's good. The concept is awesome. I'm ready. I'm down to be a bounty hunter, especially with Attack of the Clones stuff. However, all the other technical problems, all the other like little stuff involving the controls, hold it back from being truly great, at least in my opinion. I went into much more detail about this in my video review that you definitely should check out when you get a chance. But Bounty Hunter, I feel like, is another one that should have gotten a sequel. Because I felt like if it would have gotten a sequel, we would have been playing as Boba Fett, which was exactly what Star Wars 1313 was supposed to be. When you really think about it, okay? This is how all this stuff starts to connect, right? It would have been awesome to see another Bounty Hunter game because I like this game. I think it's dope. I have it on GameCube myself physically. I'm trying to see if I could get a copy of the limited edition cover on the PlayStation 2 just to have it. But overall, good game. Very solid game. Not the greatest though. Still high up on the tier list though, which is good. That's going to do it for every single Star Wars GameCube game, okay? We've done all of them. Look at this tier list, guys. Like straight up. Look at, well, it was right over here. Look at this tier list, okay? This tier list is awesome thus far. 2 Star Wars games in S tier, 4 in A tier, 5 in A tier, B tier, 5 in C tier. Nothing in D tier or trash tier. Like we've had no trash tier Star Wars games on Nintendo home console so far. We're cooking right now. However, that doesn't mean that there won't be any at some point.
I've got a bad feeling about this.
Little foreshadowing there, okay? So now we go to the to the Wii. The Nintendo Wii, which just came out after the GameCube, okay? So the Wii is weird because there's a couple good Star Wars games on the Wii that are dope, but there's also a couple bad ones, okay? So the first one, Star Wars The Force Unleashed. Now this version of the game, okay, the PlayStation 3 and some of the other versions, I scored much higher than what I'm going to score this. I'm going to score this one, to be honest with you, I want to score this a C tier Star Wars game. On the Wii specifically, okay? The reason being is because the motion control with this, because this one had the motion controls where you could swing your lightsaber and swing for attacks and stuff, it's not as good as what was on the PlayStation 3. And what's a darn shame is because that version of the game got ported over from the Wii over to the Nintendo Switch, which is on there later. And you can still use that same stuff, but it's a little bit more tweaked on the Nintendo Switch compared to this one. And it's a shame because the game is still essentially the same. The story is still essentially the same, but there is some like minor differences involving both some of the modes you could play as well as also some of the unlockables you could get, which I still feel like both the PlayStation Portable and also the PlayStation 3 versions are the better versions because of the content that you can unlock and stuff that you could do. It's like the PSP was like a hybrid of like most of the versions, but this one in particular, it's not that great compared to its brethren, I should say, but it's not trash tier. Now, what we do have, though, is we have a little thing called Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2, which automatically goes down to the D tier, man.
Bad feeling about this?
The damn shame of this game, okay? We're not in trash tier, thank God, but it's still bad. The reason being it's bad is because The Force Unleashed 2 is short, it feels like it was rushed in development, has a bunch of technical problems, and it's a damn shame because, much like its other versions, there's like nothing different about this one, but it's on the Wii U. That's the only major difference, that as far as I remember. And it's a shame because this game could have been so much better. Starkiller as a character is so awesome for a lot of people. We would have loved to see The Force Unleashed 3, which is what we were supposed to get at some point, and we never got it. So we're left with this D-tier level Star Wars game that's not trash, okay, like some of its other versions, but still just as bad, man. It's low on the tier list. It's garbage. Well, it's not trash. I can't say it's garbage because it's not trash tier, but it's pretty bad. For shame. For shame on that game. So now, from there, we go to Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens, which is also going to get, to be honest with you, I'm going to put this in B tier, okay? The reason why this is in B tier is because it has voice acting. It has a lot of the better tweaks and better design choices that we got from later Lego Star Wars games, which is good. Even though I'm not a huge fan of The Force Awakens, let alone the entire sequel trilogy, I do respect that this game was pretty decent. And much like I scored many of the other Star Wars games that are, again, Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens versions on other platforms, very similar, I'll put it to here. It's just on the Wii U. That's just like the main thing. Nothing huge, like a major difference with it. Okay, it's on the Wii U. So if you had a Wii U, you got this available to you to play. So beyond that, I think also, actually, no, I think I forgot a couple games here. I think I forgot a couple games because I'm pretty sure, yeah, this one over here. So Lego Star Wars, The Clone Wars. These are Wii. So I'm kind of like bundling Wii and Wii U together, right? So Lego Star Wars Republic Heroes. This one, again, it has a lot of the Wii stuff, the nunchuck stuff, or at least this is the battle one, or the other one's the battle one. But this one's Republic Heroes, and it's much like the same as its other versions on the PlayStation 3 and everywhere else. This is like a C-tier Star Wars game. Like, it's forgettable. If you like the Clone Wars animated series and you like the Clone Wars movie, that's totally fine, but there's really not much here to get from this. Again, swinging the Wiimote and stuff for lightsaber combat, it's really not all that great. The same thing could definitely be said for this Star Wars, the Clone Wars, what is it? I think it's Jedi Arena or Jedi Battles or whatnot, but it's another Clone Wars game that's just very similar to the Clone Wars animated cartoon. Just this one is a little bit more arena combat, has a little bit much more head-to-head stuff, or at least that's the emphasis of it. And it's a shame, because it's just like, it's whatever. It's a C-tier level Star Wars game. It's not garbage, and it's trying to do something decent or different, but it's not great. It's just kind of there. So that's where I leave those. So I think that's all of the Lego Star Wars games. I think on the Wii U, or I think, no, there's 2 more here. Yeah, because I think there's only 1 Switch game. So yeah, these are also on the Wii U or the Wii. Lego Star Wars, The Complete Saga. This one goes up to, I want to say, to the A tier. Actually, no, technically I should, you know what? We're going to put this in S tier. We're going to put this in S tier. Lego Star Wars, The Complete Saga is S tier. Straight up. Actually, you know what? No, we can't even put this in S tier, because I didn't put this in S tier when I did it in the other ones. So I think this is going to go down to A tier, because the other one we're going to talk about is S tier. But this one, Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga, is A tier, much like the original trilogy, only this time you have all the movies. Okay, you have all 6 movies of the original saga together in one Lego Star Wars game. Pretty much the exact same game as the previous ones, but still has all of them in there. That's a lot of content, a lot of unlockables, which is really good.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
And then also, Lego Star Wars 3. This one is also going to be in B tier, much like The Force Awakens, because again, this is focused on the Clone Wars specifically. It just has the voice acting and all the other little tweaks and quality of life stuff that you didn't get in some of the previous Lego Star Wars games before it. You know, you didn't really get that in Lego Star Wars, the video game, or Lego Star Wars 2. I would argue the Complete Saga as well, but this one, again, it's still good, not great, not legendary, but still definitely up there. And then finally, the last Star Wars game for a Nintendo platform, Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga on the Nintendo Switch. That's an S-tier Star Wars game. Like I've said in all the previous versions of this, it's got so much content, so much to explore, so many places to go to, so many unlockables, so many characters, all the stories from all 9 movies of the Skywalker Saga, from episode 1 to episode 9, and then some with DLC, including stuff from The Bad Batch, Andor, The Mandalorian. The list goes on. You got Ahsoka in there too. There's so many things in here, okay, that are related to Star Wars within that one game. That makes it an S-tier Star Wars game because it's fun to play. It's awesome.
Impressive. Most impressive.
So there you go, okay? This right here is the ultimate tier list for Star Wars games on Nintendo home consoles. That's every single Star Wars game released on a Nintendo home console. We've already done handheld consoles, so that's why there's not as many games, you know, that were released on consoles in comparison to what was on handhelds. But this is the entire list of every single one on every Nintendo platform. So let's go through the list right here, right? For a conclusion. S tier, okay? We have Star Wars Rogue Squadron for the N64, Star Wars Rogue Leader for the Nintendo GameCube, and Lego Star Wars The Skywalker Saga on the Nintendo Switch. Every single one of those games must play, legendary games, awesome games, highly recommend, cannot recommend them enough, especially Rogue Squadron and Rogue Leader. They're phenomenal. A tier, we got Super Return of the Jedi for Super Nintendo. We've got Lego Star Wars 2, the original trilogy on, GameCube. We have Star Wars Jedi Knight 2 Jedi Outcast on GameCube, Star Wars Rebel Strike Rogue Squadron 3 on GameCube, and Lego Star Wars The Complete Saga on the Nintendo Wii. Now, every single one of these games are great games, phenomenal stuff with it. They have some issues here and there, but they're still really good games that I could recommend, or any other Star Wars fan could recommend that you play.
This is where the fun begins.
Now let's move on to B tier, okay? B tier, we got Super Empire Strikes Back on Super Nintendo, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire, Star Wars Battle for Naboo, or Shadows of the Empire for N64, Star Wars Battle for Naboo on N64, Lego Star Wars the video game on Nintendo GameCube, Star Wars Bounty Hunter on Nintendo GameCube, Lego Star Wars The Force Awakens on the Wii U, and Lego Star Wars 3 for the Wii U as well, okay? All these games are good games. They have great stuff to them. But they have a little bit more issues than the previous tier. I can still recommend them if you're a big Star Wars fan, especially Shadows of the Empire, especially Battle for Naboo, Super Empire Strikes Back, Bounty Hunter. All those games are great. Even Lego Star Wars 1, but still, I think there are better Lego Star Wars games around. But all these games in B tier, still good games for you to check out.
A surprise, to be sure, but a welcome one.
Now let's go to C tier. C tier, okay, we got the NES Star Wars, okay? Then we got the NES The Empire Strikes Back. We got also Super Star Wars for the Super Nintendo. Star Wars Episode 1 Racer for the N64. We got Star Wars The Clone Wars on the GameCube. Star Wars The Force Unleashed for the Nintendo Wii. Clone Wars Republic Heroes for the was it Nintendo Wii. And they also got Clone Wars Jedi Battles or Jedi Duels. I can't remember the name because it's like cut off. But for the Nintendo Wii. These games have more issues than the previous tiers. They're definitely not higher up on the tier list because some of them look at these games, some people look at these games as classics, but they still have different issues for these versions of these games. Because in other platforms, I would recommend that you go play like The Force Unleashed on the PlayStation 3, or go play Republic Heroes. If you like the Clone Wars, go play that on the PS3. If you like Super Star Wars, that's fine to play it on there, but still it's very hard. Or Episode 1 Racer, it's been released in multiple platforms, even though I still feel the way that I do about it. Same thing with the Clone Wars. The Clone Wars on the GameCube, it's also on the Xbox as well, and also on the PlayStation 2. So pick your platform for all I care.
I have a bad feeling about this.
And then finally, in the only game in D tier, okay, Star Wars The Force Unleashed 2 for the Wii, or the Wii U, I should say. And man, what a disappointment of that game it was. Like, straight up, like, that game, Force Unleashed 2, so many problems with it. Even the handheld version of that game is like garbage. It's like really bad. Really terrible in comparison to its other versions. But
What kind of nonsense is this?
look at this list. What an improvement for Nintendo. Like, straight up. Because we got more S-tier Star Wars game than the entirety of all the Nintendo handheld consoles. Like, that's crazy. That's really crazy. I mean, we got more A-tier as well. There was a couple A-tier on, on the handheld consoles, but still. Like, this is so much of a better list than what we had beforehand. But there you go. Those are my thoughts on every single Star Wars game for Nintendo handheld or Nintendo home console for you guys to check out. Definitely tell me about your thoughts about the tier list down below in the comment section. Which ones or which games are your favorite ones of all time? Which ones do you like to go back to again and again? Tell me which games out of these like games here on this tier list that you grew up with, like Shadows of the Empire or Star Wars or The Empire Strikes Back on NES or Super Star Wars. Tell me about some of your favorites from that entire list down below in the comment section. Leave a like on this video. Make sure you come subscribe to the channel because there's a lot of videos on here that I know you'll love. A lot of Star Wars videos, a lot of Star Wars shorts. All the other videos for the Ultimate Star Wars tier list are in the playlist right now for you to go check out. So definitely give it a watch when you guys can. With that being said, I will talk to all of you again very soon.